All right, in this video, I'm going to move on. We're still talking about how groups can influence our behavior. Now I'm going to talk about group decision making, because sometimes you have to get together with other people to make some sort of decisions. Maybe you're on a committee, maybe you're an officer on a student organization, maybe at work you have some kind of a meeting to discuss, some important decisions that have to be made for work. Maybe you're on a jury. Maybe you are making family decisions, trying to figure out things like, should we sell our house? There are various times where you are with a group of other people and you have to make some kind of decision. Well, we know that group decision making is different than individual decision making. Those other people influence the decisions that we make in a variety of ways. One thing that happens is there is this phenomenon that's related to risk, all right? Because sometimes some decisions are riskier than others. There's this thing that happens called a risky shift. In group decision making, risky decisions are more likely than if you were just making decisions individually. You can shift in the direction of going more extreme, more willing to take big risks. And so in general, more risky decision making. Now, try to think of an example. Maybe you're trying to think of something like, hey, should we buy that new house? Or maybe you're with a student organization where they're like, hey, should we revamp our entire mission? Should we relaunch this organization? Something that could go badly, that could be very risky. Let's go even bigger than that. What if it's a government official that's having to make decisions about how to change the infrastructure of whoever, the community, the place that they are, that they're serving in some way. All right, so we are more likely to make those risky decisions or to shift in the direction of being okay with risky decisions when it's group decision making. All right, so sometimes you make bad decisions because of that risky shift. You're like, hey, what could go wrong? We're all excited about this risky decision. Now, some other things, related things that can happen that can lead to some of these risky, not so successful decisions that could be made. You could have something called group polarization. Now, polarization, it has to do with there being poles, being extremes. People become more extreme in their views with group decision making. Like people who are against an idea, they get really against the idea. People who are for an idea, they can get really for an idea. And so you tend to see this. You tend to see that you don't end up with a lot of people in the middle, a lot of people with moderate views. You tend to see this group polarization. That is where it's a tendency for like-minded groups to become more extreme in their opinions and positions as a result of being part of a group. As an individual, there's more likelihood that you can be kind of moderate and in the middle. And so another thing that happens is some individuals in a group can become louder. The louder voices, they can help with that polarization, because if you agree with them in any sense, you're going to be drawn, to the person who seems to have, some element of your opinion, your position. And so you're drawn to them and you're like, yes, I like that idea. I'm going to go with that. And this polarization can happen, that people can become more extreme. Now, another thing that can happen is you can have this thing called groupthink occur. Groupthink occurs where you're in a group, you value harmony within a group. You don't want to be a group that fights with each other, that argues with each other. If it's a group you have positive feelings about, like your family, your organization, your student organization, your work organization, your cabinet, if you're like, in a big position like being president, you have this group that we think, hey, we're a group, we're a team, we like each other in some way. Group decision making can be difficult because you don't like to disagree with each other. Disagreeing with each other is very uncomfortable when you have a group that you feel positively about. So groupthink can occur where there's no dissent. Nobody wants to bring up, hey, this is a bad idea. Like if that risky shift has happened, nobody wants to be the one to say, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe this will go badly. That is seen like you're going against the group. That, hey, don't you like us? Aren't you loyal to me as your leader if there's a leader of the group? So you can get this situation where you get what we call, yes men, yes women. If you've heard that term, it's like, yes, we agree because we like you. We like this group. So anything that comes up, you get agreement, but it's really difficult to disagree. Disagreement can become very difficult. So you get this groupthink. So this occurs when group members' opinions become uniform. They become the same. They become so uniform that any dissent becomes impossible because then you're seen as being negative. You're seen as being difficult. So risky shift happens. People don't call out the riskiness of the decisions or the ideas that come forward. Nobody wants to point it out. Nobody wants to dissent. So you can end up with bad decisions that result from all three of these phenomena, from risky shift, from group polarization, and from groupthink. Right, to give you a specific example of how things can go wrong with group decision making and how group decision making can differ from individual decision making. And I tried to pick an example that's not one of the ones in the textbook. So the example that I'm going to give is actually one that I remember vividly from my own childhood. I know I am older than most of my students. This happened before most of my students were born. But in 1986, there was this big moment, very memorable for a lot of folks my age who were in elementary school at the time, where there was a space shuttle launch. There was the space shuttle, the Challenger was the name of the space shuttle, and a lot of schools had lessons about it because it was a big deal. A teacher was going to be on the space shuttle and she was going to do lessons from space, and so it was televised. A lot of schools televised it in the classroom. We had done worksheets about NASA and the space shuttle program leading up to the launch. It was kind of a big deal, and you may or may not be familiar with the fact that it ended in tragedy when the space shuttle exploded shortly after launching. The thing is, we now know that the people in charge very well knew that that was a possibility. Not just a possibility, but almost a likely possibility. I had to adjust my camera there for a second. The space shuttle launched from Florida. You may be familiar with the fact that Florida is usually a very warm place. It was unusually cold that day, close to freezing temperatures, which is not something that they normally had to deal with. And there were these things called O-rings, the gaskets on the space shuttle, that people knew were likely to fail in colder temperatures. They'd never really had to deal with that before, again, because usually you're launching from a warm place in Florida. And so the day of the launch, as a group, they made a decision about whether or not to go forward with the launch. They made a risky decision, knowing that there was a likelihood that something horrible could happen. They went ahead and they went forward. And there might have been lots of factors beyond just that they were in a group, that they were excited, the world was getting ready for it. It would have been a big letdown to be like, oh no, we had to cancel or delay the launch. But we certainly know that all of the individuals who contributed to this group decision, they all had misgivings. They all had fears that things would go badly. But in a group, they made that riskier decision. They had a risky shift and nobody spoke up. You had some groupthink going on. Nobody spoke up and said, actually, no, I'm going to be the downer. No, we should not go forward. We should not do this. Nobody spoke up. They went forward. It was a disaster. So that's an example of how group decision making can lead to disastrous outcomes.